The convoy moved through the misted dawn like a quiet river of defeat. Boots scuffed mud into the ruts of a French country road still littered with shrapnel and the ghost smell of smoke. American jeeps idled nearby, their engines growling low, a warning more than a threat. At first glance, the column looked like any other line of surrendered German troops. Gray coats dulled by rain, helmets hanging from belts, shoulders bowed. But here and there, startlingly out of place, were women. They wore the same weary field gray, but their collars hinted at a softer cut. Their hair coiled into hurried braids or hidden under caps. Some clutched small satchels or medical kits. Others kept hands bare and stiff, fingers raw from cold. A few stared straight ahead, with the practiced neutrality of people refusing to give strangers the satisfaction of seeing their fear. Among them walked Anna Vogel, 22, once a Luftwaffe radio operator who believed she would spend the war far from the front. Her boots were borrowed, too large, her heels blistered from days of retreat. She kept her eyes down, measuring each step, determined not to stumble before the watchful American guards. To her right was Marta Klein, a Red Cross nurse who had been stationed near the Rhine. She held herself upright, despite exhaustion, jaw clenched against tears that threatened whenever she thought of the hospital she'd left behind. Behind them came Liesel, barely 19, a secretary who had been swept into the war effort as Germany crumbled. Their lives had been built around duty and the steady pulse of German propaganda promising glory and protection. That morning, under a pale sky and foreign gaze, the myths had shattered. The soundscape was jarring, the low rumble of engines, boots sinking in mud, and, somewhere beyond the hills, a rooster crowing into the silence of defeat. An American soldier, barely older than Anna, walked backward along the column with a rifle across his chest. He looked at them not with hatred but with curiosity that felt even more unnerving. Anna caught him glance at her braid, quickly look away. In that brief flicker, she realized how strange this must be for him too. To guard enemy women, when weeks earlier he had been trained to kill unseen soldiers behind distant guns. Hours later, the prisoners were herded into a courtyard surrounded by sandbagged walls. There, American officers counted them and separated men from women. The sudden division felt like another humiliation. Not soldiers, but something other, something lesser. A clipboard officer barked numbers. A medic checked for wounds. When it was Marta's turn, she met the medic's eyes with cool defiance, though her stomach lurched when he asked, in halting German, if she needed water. The simple kindness confused her more than cruelty might have. Their capture had been quick. Just days before, they had been retreating with fragments of the collapsing Wehrmacht. Rumors flew that the Americans would not bother with prisoners, that women especially would face revenge for Nazi crimes. Some whispered about assaults, starvation, forced marches, yet now they stood in relative order, watched but not struck, fed a crust of white bread softer than any ration they'd known in months. The contradiction was dizzying. Anna chewed slowly, tasting disbelief more than flour. On the docks at Le Havre, the Atlantic waited gray and endless. The women were funneled up gangways onto Liberty ships already crowded with captured men. The sea air smelled of oil and rust. Guards waved them forward, some embarrassed, some businesslike. The voyage lasted weeks. Seasickness claimed most quickly. The rolling decks turned strong stomachs to stone. Anna spent nights pressed against cold steel, listening to the hum of engines and the muffled coughs of strangers. Once a sailor tossed them extra oranges, bright suns rolling across the deck. The gesture felt strange, almost dangerous in its gentleness. Marta pocketed one for later, peeling it in secret and sharing wedges with Liesel under a wool blanket. Propaganda had promised them a savage America. Lynching, hunger, cruelty. Yet when the Statue of Liberty's torch appeared through morning haze, it was not menace, but a silent giant, impassive to their fate. They disembarked to train platforms heavy with soldiers and Red Cross workers. Some Americans stared openly. Enemy women were rare, exotic in their own way. Others turned away as if embarrassed by the sight. Military police directed them with curt gestures, but no blows came. It was not kindness, exactly. But it was not the nightmare they had feared. Train windows framed a new world. Fields rolling with corn and cotton, billboards shouting in English, children waving at the strange convoys. The prisoners sat rigid, unsure whether to return the gestures. Liesel finally raised a hand, small and trembling. A boy on a bicycle waved back wildly, grinning. The carriage erupted in nervous laughter that ended as quickly as it began. Camp Gates appeared like another country altogether. Barbed wire gleamed under bright sun. Guard towers stood watchful, but not ominous. Beyond the fences were neat rows of wooden barracks, a water tower and, impossibly, a baseball diamond carved into the dust. A radio played swing music somewhere out of sight. The air smelled of cut grass and soap. This was no dungeon. It was a contradiction that unsettled more than comforted. Their first night passed in fitful sleep. Guards checked barracks but did not leer or shout. Dinner was stew and bread, far better than the watery cabbage they had survived on in Germany's final months. There was even coffee, its warmth almost insulting after hunger. Conversation whispered in the dark. Confusion, relief, suspicion. Marta murmured that it was a trick, that kindness would fade. Anna wasn't sure. She only knew her fear had shifted from survival to something murkier, the humiliation of safety granted by enemies. Yet danger lingered in subtler ways. Some American guards laughed crudely, throwing words the women didn't understand but recognized as leers. A few prisoners worried about what work details might bring, and deeper still was the ache of identity. Stripped of uniforms, they were neither soldiers nor civilians, neither respected nor fully reviled. They were adrift. As days stretched, small details lodged in memory. The first time they heard swing music drift through an open mess hall door. Brass and drums, so unlike the martial marches of home. The first sight of black and white Americans working side by side, defying the racial hierarchies Nazi schooling had insisted were natural. The taste of peanut butter, odd and sweet, smeared on bread. Each moment chipped away at old certainties. Anna wrote her name on a scrap of paper, practicing English letters she had seen on crate stencils, A-N-N-A. The act felt rebellious, as if claiming some small control. Marta watched the American nurses work in crisp white, laughing with medics. She envied their confidence, but would never admit it aloud. Liesel, youngest of all, pressed her face to the barracks window at night, watching fireflies spark in the dark, wondering if this strange land could ever feel less foreign. By the time summer heat settled over the camp, fear had dulled into wary curiosity. The women were alive, fed, and, in a strange way, noticed. The enemy looked back not as monsters, but as men. Some kind, some coarse, all startlingly human. That realization unsettled Anna more than capture had. The world had been simple before. Us and them. Victory and defeat. Now the boundaries blurred. One evening, as the sun bled red behind the barbed wire, Anna heard laughter from beyond the fence. American soldiers played baseball, the crack of bat against ball echoing like gunfire turned harmless. A few guards waved casually at the watching prisoners. One even tipped his cap. Anna's heart thudded with a confusion she could not name. Part fear, part wonder, part something she had been warned never to feel for an enemy. She turned away quickly, but not before she sensed a shift inside her. Small and dangerous. Safety had replaced terror. Curiosity was stirring where hatred was supposed to live. And somewhere, beyond the diamond's cheers and the wire's cold shimmer, the first quiet tremor of something even more forbidden was beginning to rise. The first weeks inside the camp unfolded with the strange cadence of a life that felt both imprisoned and oddly civilized. Anna woke each morning to the clang of a bell and the drone of a guard's voice calling roll. The barracks smelled of pine boards and soap, a far cry from the damp basements she had crouched in during air raids. Sunlight poured through narrow windows, illuminating rows of bunks where women stirred with muttered words in German. Outside, the air was laced with cut grass and dust, so alien it might as well have been another planet. She stepped into the yard each day with a mix of suspicion and awe, trying to reconcile the barbed wire with the freedom of sky stretching endlessly above. Meals were a revelation. They lined up in mess halls where American cooks ladled hearty stews thick with potatoes and beef, bread still soft from ovens, and coffee so strong it jolted their nerves. At first, the women eyed each plate with distrust, convinced the abundance was some cruel trick. Marta, ever the skeptic, whispered that it was meant to soften them, to make them pliant for propaganda. Yet when she chewed slowly and tasted salt, garlic, and a richness she had forgotten existed, her hands trembled. Liesel, youngest of them all, licked her spoon clean and laughed. A laugh so out of place it silenced the table before others joined in nervously. For the first time in months they were not starving. The betrayal was not of body, but of expectation. Beyond rations, daily life revealed a rhythm that startled them further. The Americans observed the Geneva Convention, something they had been told was meaningless. They had access to medical care. Marta was even allowed to assist in the infirmary, where she watched American nurses tease each other good-naturedly while tending wounds. She carried bandages, noted the quality of supplies, and wondered why enemies should be so well equipped to heal. She had tended boys in Germany with nothing but rags and prayer. Now, gauze came in neat rolls, antiseptic in labeled bottles, and medicines she could only dream of. Each item felt like a tiny indictment of the lies she had been fed. Work details followed. While men were sent to harvest crops or repair roads, the women were assigned to laundry, clerical tasks, or the camp hospital. Anna copied records in halting English, the foreign letters both infuriating and thrilling under her pencil. Guards supervised but rarely shouted, content to let monotony enforce discipline. On breaks, she heard radios playing songs with voices that glided like silk. Bing Crosby crooning about dreams, swing bands rattling brass and drums. These were not the angry anthems of propaganda. They were warm, wistful, inviting, and they made Anna ache for reasons she could not name. Then came baseball. One evening, as the women walked back from the hospital detail, they saw American soldiers gathering on the diamond carved into the dust. Guards shifted in their towers but seemed relaxed, almost jovial, as though the game itself were security. A bat cracked against a ball, sharp as a gunshot, but followed by laughter and cheers. At first, the prisoners watched stiffly, unsure if they were permitted. Then an American waved his hand, beckoning them to look closer. The game unfolded like ritual, pitchers winding, runners sprinting, dust rising from cleats. To women raised on marching formations and parades of power, it was bewildering to see soldiers compete with joy rather than dominance. Liesel leaned against the fence, eyes wide, whispering, "They fight with laughter." Anna wanted to scoff, but couldn't tear her gaze away. Small interactions followed, tentative and careful. An American soldier tossed a foul ball near the fence. Liesel picked it up, the leather smooth and warm from sun, and tossed it back. The crowd cheered, and she flushed crimson. Another day, Marta stumbled while carrying laundry, and a guard stooped to help her gather the bundle, muttering something kind in broken German. Such gestures unsettled them more than cruelty could have. It was easy to steel against blows, far harder to resist small acts that hinted at humanity across enemy lines. Yet suspicion clung like shadow. Letters from home, when they came, were censored, black bars blotting out names and phrases. The women knew Germany was collapsing, though official words never said so. Rumors spread like fire. Hitler dead, cities in ruins, families starving. Some nights muffled sobs filled the barracks as the truth gnawed silently. Safety in America became a guilt they wore heavy. How could they eat stew while their mothers boiled weeds into soup? Marta, especially, felt torn between relief and shame, her nurse's heart aching for those she could not reach. The local townspeople added another layer of tension. Farmers working near the camp sometimes stopped to stare, crossing themselves at the sight of enemy women. Children whispered or laughed, daring each other to approach the wire. Church groups arrived with Bibles translated into German, some offering smiles, others looks sharp as knives. For every kind face, there was another filled with suspicion, muttering that murderers deserved no kindness. The women bore the stairs with downcast eyes, clinging to dignity and silence. Yet privately, Anna wondered at the strangeness, to be both feared and pitied at once. As weeks slipped into months, barriers thinned. Marta began trading words with an American nurse, learning English terms for medical instruments. Anna practiced writing short phrases. Thank you, please, I am well. Liesel grew bold enough to hum along with American songs, her voice fragile but sweet. Each step forward carried danger. Rules forbade fraternization, and guards could punish disobedience. Still, curiosity pressed harder than fear. They had been told the enemy was monstrous. Yet, day by day, they found themselves watching men who laughed, shared cigarettes, even played music for the sheer joy of it. The simplicity of it all was its own quiet rebellion against everything they had been taught. The central conflict hardened within them, loyalty to the world they had come from versus the unsettling pull of the one they now inhabited. Marta clung to the memory of German hospitals, her oath to serve her people. Anna wrestled with shame that safety came from captors rather than comrades. Liesel, too young to remember a world before war, found herself wondering if this foreign land might hold a gentleness worth trusting. Each carried questions that gnawed more deeply than hunger ever had. One evening, as twilight softened the camp, Anna sat alone near the barracks fence. The baseball diamond glowed under makeshift lights, soldiers still playing long after sunset. Cheers rang out, echoing through the humid air. She pressed her hand to the wire, feeling its cold bite, and watched the Americans slap each other's backs, laughter spilling into the night. Something inside her shifted, sharp and undeniable. This was not the America of nightmares, not the enemy she had braced her heart against. It was something far more dangerous, a glimpse of humanity where she had been trained to see only hate. She pulled her hand back quickly, ashamed of the tremor that ran through her fingers. Tomorrow would come with the same roll calls, the same fences, the same silence. Yet tonight she carried a secret, fragile and incendiary. She was beginning to doubt the world she had once believed unshakable. And in that doubt, the first threads of a story neither she nor her captors yet understood were already being woven, quietly, beneath the glow of the ball-field lights. The first tremor of something forbidden began on a day so ordinary it should have gone unnoticed. Anna was assigned to the infirmary again, her English halting but growing bolder as she fetched supplies for the American nurses. The room smelled of antiseptic and starch, sunlight cutting pale stripes across white sheets. On one bed lay a soldier, with his arm bound tight in fresh bandages, his face drawn but alert. He was younger than she expected, freckles scattered across skin browned by the southern sun. When she placed a tray nearby, he looked up and offered a shy, lopsided smile. "Danke," he said, the word awkward on his tongue but genuine in intent. Anna froze. She had expected indifference, perhaps mockery. Instead, there was a boyish attempt at kindness, a bridge built with one borrowed word. She managed a quiet "thank you" back, the syllables strange but thrilling in her mouth. That night, she lay awake in the barracks, unable to forget the way his eyes had softened. How quickly fear could crumble when met with something as simple as a smile. Marta noticed before Anna admitted anything. The older woman was folding bandages when she saw the American. His name was James, she learned later. Pause near Anna's station, pretending to check a supply list. Marta's glance was sharp but not unkind. She knew danger when she saw it. Fraternization was forbidden, punishable by transfer, or worse. Yet she also saw the flicker in Anna's expression, the way a guarded heart can't help but lean toward warmth after so much cold. Across the camp, Liesel found her own small rebellion. She often lingered near the baseball field, sketching players in the dirt with a stick. One evening, a ball rolled to the fence where she crouched. A soldier jogged over, a tall man with an easy grin. He tapped the ball against the wire, then mimed a throw. Liesel tossed it back with a laugh that surprised them both. The next day he returned, holding up a comic book through the fence, its colors vivid even in the fading light. She pressed her hand to the wire but dared not take it. Still, she memorized the title, A Secret Talisman to Hold Against the Long Night. Rumors bloomed like wildflowers among the women. Quiet conversations with guards, gifts of candy or cigarettes, a smuggled note written in shaky German or clumsy English. Some scoffed, warning of heartbreak and punishment. Others whispered with wistful curiosity. The war had carved their world into brutal simplicity. Enemy and ally, loyalty and treason. But inside these fences, the edges blurred. Compassion arrived in small, disarming doses. An orange slipped from a nurse's pocket, a book loaned across a guarded threshold, a guard humming along when Liesel sang. Yet every kindness carried weight. Marta wrestled with guilt as she accepted an English dictionary from a sympathetic medic. She wanted to know the language for practical reasons, she told herself. But the truth ran deeper. Understanding them felt like crossing a moral border she'd once sworn to hold. Anna, too, felt the tug of betrayal each time she caught James watching her work. His expression unreadable, but somehow safe. She had grown up on speeches about American savagery. Now she was building fragile trust with a man who should have been her nightmare. Still, fear of reprisal lingered. Guards posted signs forbidding personal contact between prisoners and U.S. personnel. Whispers told of transfers to harsher camps when rules were broken. One evening, an officer stormed into the infirmary after catching a German man passing a love letter to a local girl. The man vanished the next day. Anna and Marta stood frozen as the officer barked warnings, hearts pounding with unspoken truths they dared not share. But love is a quiet insurgent. It slips past warnings and grows in the spaces rules cannot reach. Over weeks, Anna and James built a silent language of glances and small courtesies. He learned to say, "Are you well?" in hesitant German. She replied in equally clumsy English. Once, he left an apple on the supply shelf where she worked, pretending not to notice when she found it. Marta scolded her gently, but didn't stop her from taking the fruit. "You're alive," she said softly one night, "and life wants to feel." The shifting tide was not just romance, but humanity reclaiming ground lost to ideology. Liesel began humming American tunes with other girls, laughter replacing the brittle silence that had once filled the barracks. Marta traded medical tips with an American nurse, two women bound less by nationality than by the shared language of healing. Even Anna's guarded heart softened, though fear remained. She could not imagine a future beyond the fence, nor what her family would say if they knew she smiled at a soldier in enemy uniform. Then came the evening that changed the air entirely. A summer storm had rolled in, drenching the camp in silver rain. The baseball field lay empty, puddles rippling under floodlights. Anna lingered by the infirmary door after her shift, unwilling to step back into the barracks' restless chatter. James appeared suddenly, rain plastering his hair to his forehead. For a moment, They simply looked at each other, caught between worlds. Then he reached into his pocket and drew out a folded scrap of paper, shielded carefully from the wet. He held it out, silent. Her hands shook as she took it. Inside was a single sentence, scrawled in uncertain English. "You are safe. You are human." It was not a love confession, not a promise, but it cracked something open in her chest. She stared at the words until they blurred with rain, unsure whether to laugh or cry. When she looked up, he was already walking away, shoulders hunched against the storm, leaving her alone with the paper pressed to her heart. That night, Anna hid the note under her pillow and lay awake long after lights out. Outside, rain drummed steady on the roof while distant thunder rolled. She thought of home, of radio rooms gone silent, of propaganda posters curling in the ruins, and felt the first fragile possibility that the war inside her might one day end. Somewhere beyond these fences, the world was rebuilding, and here, in the unlikeliest of places, a seed of something tender and dangerous had taken root, daring to grow where only fear had lived before. The war's end came not with a shout, but with a slow, bewildering unraveling. One morning, the guards told the prisoners that Germany had surrendered months before, that the Reich was gone, and that the world was already trying to stitch itself back together. There were no cheers in the women's barracks, only stunned silence and quiet weeping. For Anna, the news was both a relief and a hollowing blow. She had survived, yet the country she thought she knew had crumbled. Marta sat on her bunk, staring at her hands, whispering a prayer that felt half like mourning. Liesel cried openly, grief and relief tangled together. The war she had grown up inside now, simply, over freedom when it came, was not the triumphant liberation she had imagined as a girl. Repatriation orders arrived like summons, brisk and bureaucratic. The women were told to pack what little they owned, a comb, a photograph, a scrap of cloth, and prepare to sail back to a homeland in ruins. Rumors swept the camp of cities turned to rubble, of hunger and suspicion waiting for those who returned. Some prisoners longed for home despite the fear. Others, like Anna, found themselves torn between duty and a strange, guilty desire to stay in this unexpected safety. Anna's last days in the camp were haunted by James. They still exchanged glances when she passed the infirmary, but now the weight of time pressed hard. She had tucked his rain-soaked note deep in her belongings, reading it at night when sleep refused to come. Once, she caught his eye across the yard, and for a heartbeat she almost crossed the line between them. But rules, barbed wire, and the heavy shadow of worlds still divided held her back. Marta noticed, of course, and said nothing beyond a quiet squeeze of Anna's shoulder. Marta herself faced a quieter struggle. She had built an unlikely professional camaraderie with an American nurse, a woman named Ellen, who had taught her new medical techniques and shared extra bandages without asking. Saying goodbye felt like tearing a bandage off a wound not yet healed. Marta had lost so much: her hospital, her certainty, her faith in the regime she once obeyed, and this small friendship had been a lifeline. When Ellen pressed a tiny package of sterile gauze into her hands at parting, Marta could not speak. She only nodded, eyes shining. Liesel, still barely 20, was both frightened and exhilarated by the future. The comic book soldier who had once tossed her gifts at the fence waved when she boarded the transport truck. She clutched the memory like a secret flame. For her, America had been a revelation. A land of contradictions, yes, but also of music, laughter, and unexpected kindness. She didn't know if she would ever see it again. But it had cracked open the world beyond the narrow path laid out by propaganda. The departure was quiet, but heavy with unspoken emotion. As the women climbed into trucks, guards offered curt nods, some managing awkward goodbyes. James stood near the infirmary steps, hands shoved in his pockets. Anna looked for him once, then again her heart hammering. Their eyes met one last time, a moment too brief to hold, but long enough to change her forever. He didn't wave. Neither did she. Yet the silence carried more than any words they could have dared to speak. The ship ride back was harsher than the first, seasickness mixed with dread, as the Atlantic stretched endless and cold. Letters, if they came, would be censored, delayed, or lost. Some women whispered plans to return to America if they could, marrying farmers or soldiers who had promised to send for them. Others scoffed at the idea, clinging fiercely to what little pride remained. Marta spent hours staring at the horizon, torn between relief to go home and fear of what waited. Anna kept to herself, James's note folded tight in her palm whenever the loneliness threatened to consume her. Germany, when it appeared, was a wound still open. Ports were ruins of twisted steel. Cities lay in rubble. Civilians scoured debris for scraps of food. The women stepped ashore to cold stares, some pitying, some accusing. They were survivors of a lost cause, tainted by captivity, suspect to both neighbors and officials. Rumors about American softness were dangerous to repeat. The new Germany wanted silence about weakness and fraternization. Yet memories refused to vanish. They lived in small gestures. Marta wrapping a patient's wound with Ellen's gauze, Liesel humming swing tunes as she swept a broken street, Anna tracing English letters in secret notebooks. For Anna, the hardest battle began after the war. Suitors came. Weary German men rebuilding their lives. But none saw the woman she had become. She dreamed not of glory or vengeance, but of that ball-field laughter, of an apple left without explanation, of a boy who told her she was human. She heard that some women had managed to return to America, marrying their guards after years of paperwork and suspicion. She wondered if James thought of her, or if life had swept him into other battles of peace. She would never know. Marta rebuilt a small clinic in her hometown, stitching wounds with both old skill and the new techniques Ellen had taught. She raised no flag, swore no new oaths. She worked quietly, healing where she could. A private rebellion against a world that had tried to turn her into a tool. Liesel married a schoolteacher and filled her home with music foreign to everyone else, teaching her children to question simple truths. In their private ways, each woman carried the lessons of captivity. That enemies can be human, that kindness can survive war's machinery, that love, fleeting or lasting, can bloom in the least expected soil. Years later, Anna would walk past a schoolyard where children played a rough version of baseball with a stick and a rubber ball. She would stop, heart catching at the crack, and cheer. In that sound lived the memory of a fence, a field, and a boy who had changed everything with one gentle sentence. She smiled then, quietly, to herself. History had taught her that nations rise and fall, that flags can lie, and leaders can fail. But beneath it all, the human heart remains stubborn, unpredictable, and ungovernable. The war had taken her home, her certainty, and her innocence. Yet it had also given her a truth she would never surrender, that even behind barbed wire, love can defy the strongest walls.